Hey everyone, welcome to Flutter Atlanta. Thank you to everybody tuning in online, and thank you to the people that came out in person. Today we're going to be talking about Gemini, but before we get started, my name's Emmett. I am an engineering manager here at Black Airplane. I have a background in native Android and iOS development. I've been using Flutter for a little over 4 years, built over 20 different Flutter apps, have several more in progress, and I love Flutter so much that I'm using it for my own projects. I want to give a quick shout out to Black Airplane. They provide the space for us to actually host the meetup here, and they also provide food and beer. Black Airplane is a leading development agency in the Southeast, and we have a special team here that produces top quality work, and we can build pretty much anything these days. And also I added this in here really small at the bottom, but this meant a lot to me. We actually have won the Top Flutter Developers Clutch Award for Georgia in 2024. So all of this investment in Flutter has definitely paid off. We got several other awards there you can see too. But if you're looking for Flutter development help in Georgia, reach out to us. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about using Gemini in your Flutter apps. Got a typo there, of course. And really what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be building a chat client for Gemini. So similar to ChatGPT kind of experience, we're going to use a Firebase extension to spin up Gemini and then use a little Flutter client to interact with it and kind of experiment with it. So we're going to build all of that live. I do already have the repo up. It's in the description of the YouTube video if you want to check it out with a working version. So I'm going to try and remember everything I did there and do it live for you guys. In case that's helpful, I can walk through and explain step by step everything I'm doing. And also if I run into any issues, you can kind of see my debugging pattern. Maybe that'll be interesting for some of you. But before we dive in, let's briefly talk about what Gemini is. So Gemini is a new AI tool coming out of the Google team. And really this is going to be their answer for generative AI up against OpenAI and their ChatGPT counterparts. So it's a multimodal model, and what that means is you can interact with text, images, audio, video, and code. In this example, we're only going to be doing their chatbot, but they also have a Firebase extension for the multimodal setup. So if you want it to analyze your images and audio or whatever, there's going to be a very similar process to getting that set up. So if we just briefly look through their website a little bit, they are going to be comparing it to some of their competitors like GPT-4, and they'll kind of tell you how awesome theirs is compared to the competitors, of course. But yeah, the actual experience is going to be very similar. Being that Flutter is a Google product, we wanted to try and keep it all under the same umbrella, so that's why we opted to do this tutorial with Gemini. But if you wanted to interact with OpenAI, it's going to be very similar, but you're not going to have some nice handy-dandy things like the Flutter or Firebase extensions. So again, we're going to use a couple things here to set this up, but the first thing is going to be our Firebase extensions. So I went ahead and set up a project here, and I've upgraded to the Blaze plan for Firebase. What that means is it's pay as you go. So you're not setting up this project going to incur any costs really at the beginning, but because you're using an API that's fairly expensive, you do have to attach your credit card because they're not just going to let you use that for free and run up a bill without having a payment method attached. So you will have to upgrade here. To find the extensions, you're just going to go under the Build tab and click on Extensions. I've already set one up here because I did have to put in an API key. I didn't want to do that live on stream, but we'll go through the configuration settings here so you guys can see kind of what it takes to set this up. But if you were setting this up for the first time, you wouldn't have this here. You can hit this Explore Extensions, and they have tons of these. If you have not ever looked through these before, I highly encourage you do so. You might end up finding you're writing cloud functions that do a lot of these things. They have some really handy things like searching with Algolia, resizing image, running payments with Stripe. If you use Revenue Cat in your mobile apps, they have really great extensions for that kind of sync the subscription status. So before you go building out a custom backend, check out Firebase extensions. You might be able to just hit a couple buttons and install it, and they're really, really great to use. So if we search up Gemini to see which ones we have, there's two main extensions that they have. They have the one that we're going to use today, which is this chatbot with Gemini. And again, you can just install it by clicking this button here and following the guide. And then they also have this multimodal, which has both the text and image options, which is very interesting. So if you want a challenge after you kind of look through this code, try and make the chat accept images or something and give you some valuable responses. So now that we've kind of talked about that, let's dig into what the extension options are. So again, you'll have a couple different API providers. You're going to provide an API key in your language model, and then you actually get into a couple of different settings. So the way this works, and the way a lot of Firebase extension works, it's not like you actually hit an API with an HTTP request. You're not going to hit some endpoint. It almost always uses Firestore database as the triggers, which is one of the superpowers of Firebase extensions, cloud functions in general, is essentially we can just add a document to Firestore with a prompt, and then it will run and trigger in the background, and once it has its answer, it'll just update the document with the response. So it's really handy, very easy to interact with the client side because you don't have a whole bunch of extra setup. So with that being said, a couple of these settings, we're going to have a collection path. So in this case, I've just named our collection messages. You're going to have a prompt field, which is going to be what you want to ask the API. The response field, which is going to be what it responds with. And then they have just some other optional fields here that allow you to automatically order these things or provide extra context, mess with the temperature, which is kind of the randomness, and all of these other very advanced settings. For us, I just did the out of the box, set up the collection path, and left everything else the same. So before we jump into Flutter code, let's see this in action. So we have a Firestore database set up here. Again, I've cleared it all out before we started, but we can create a collection just manually here and just call it messages. And then let's add our first document. We'll just automatically generate an ID, and the prompt field name is just prompt. And we can just ask it, let's see, why is Flutter the best? And when we hit save here, you'll see it'll add the document, and the extension will go ahead and trigger in the background, and you'll see it live update right there with a status of processing. And then after a couple seconds, it will actually just update the Firestore document with its response. So this is the backend that we're going to be using for our chat application, which again, when you're thinking about setting up Gemini, most of the questions are going to be, how do you set up the backend? With one click Firebase extension and just setting up the collection path, we've already done all of that. And now we're just going to interact with the Firestore database as if it's completely normal. So let's go ahead and hop in there. I'm going to move this over. I already have this running. I have a blank application, and we're going to build a little chat UI and then interact with this Firestore collection that we've just made. So again, we're not building some complex chat UI from scratch. We wouldn't do that. We're actually going to utilize this -chat package. So as you can see, it's going to look very normal to like a normal messaging app, or even like your iMessage app. They have a whole bunch of options if you want to add mentions, avatars, all of that. Great package. We've used it in several apps before. If you're looking to build a chat application, give this a look. Super lightweight, easy. So now let's take a quick look at how our project's set up. I used the Very Good Venture CLI to set up this project. They do some nice things with linting and some different things like that. I've also went ahead and set up Firebase so that way all of that's there. But we have our very simple architecture here right now. We just have a presentation layer. We have this bootstrap file, which is great if you have flavors that you could do cross-flavor setup. And then I've minimized it just for one flavor for this simple example. So we have our main file, which is going to call this bootstrap, which is going to help set up a couple of different things. And it will end up creating our app file here, which is what will look familiar to most of you. We don't have any routing set up. We have one page called chat page. That's all we're going to need for this example. And then under our pages, we have the chat page view, which right now is just this scaffold. So you can see that over here. Awesome. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's make sure we get the Firebase data layer set up. So I'm just going to treat the Firebase client as my data layer. So I'm just going to create a repository in my domain layer. So I'm going to create two different folders in here. One for models, one for repositories. Let me head over to my PubSpec real quick. Let's see everything we have installed. So again, we have Block installed. That's what we'll be using for our state management, Cloud Firestore. We have Dart-Z pulled in here, which is going to force us to handle our errors on the front end. We have our Firebase core. And then we have went ahead and pulled in freezed and JSON serializable, which is going to help us set up these data classes quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Really, if we look at our Firebase setup, again, now that we have our sample message to reference, you're going to have your create time as a timestamped, your prompt, the response, and then you have this status section. So we're actually going to need two different models here. We're going to have a Gemini message, which is going to be this encapsulating object, and then that Gemini status that we can access later. The reason I want this information really is so I can get that complete time. The complete time, I just want to have that as the time that that message was sent, so I can order by it. So let's set that up really quick. So we'll make a Gemini message.dart, and we'll make a Gemini status.dart. I have some handy snippets here that will help me make these a little bit faster. So the first thing is we're going to do a Gemini status. Gemini status. Oh, 1 second. Messed up my snippet. And in our status, we're going to have a state, which we're actually going to treat as an enum here. So I'm going to make an enum. We're just going to call it state. And then we're going to have processing. We're going to have completed and error. And these do have specific JSON values that are capitalized. So just to make sure our parsing works appropriately. See if it will autocomplete for me. Yep. Awesome. I do have a pretty strict linter on right now. I'm going to turn off some of that. I'm not going to worry about the linting too much here. Actually, we'll just leave it. Don't want to mess with that right now. So in the status, again, we have this state and these three different timestamps. So this timestamp class is a little bit of a pain, but it does come out of the Firestore package. So first thing we'll add is a state. We'll make it optional. And that will pull from this class, or this enum here. And then we are going to have a timestamp that's optional. Will be complete time, start time, and update time. We'll import this from Firestore. These classes don't have native toJSON and fromJSON methods, so I do have to add a custom one. If you were going to use this throughout a large project, you'd probably do this as a converter, but in this case I'm just going to add it as a method, just like this, fromJSON. And it's going to be coming in as the type already, so it's going to look a little odd, but actually let me make sure I get this right for my current repository. Domain. Make sure we get this appropriate. We'll just steal these really quick. So once we have these toJSON and fromJSON methods, we then have to add a JSON key and assign these from JSON as tear-offs to JSON. And then we need to assign this to all. Right. So again, we're using Build Runner to build these. So let's give this a go really quick. See if this will build for us without any issues. An issue. Unable to generate package. Right. What is the issue? Unable to generate package graph.
No YAML file.
We do have a YAML file here. I think there's...
Right path?
I'm sorry?
Is there a right path?
I believe so. Looks like we're having a
Dart tool.
Let me try running a clean really quick and see if this fixes our issue. Because this is referring to a pub spec in the Dart tool file, not in our normal 82.
Is there a Flutter gen under your Dart tool path that your directory?
Yeah, let me double check that we have this added to the pub spec, the build runner. We do have the build runner added here. We have freezed and JSON serializable under the dev dependencies, saying unable to generate package
But
graph.
it's the path, right? So if you go into Dart tool, Flutter gen, pub spec, Dart tool, there's no Flutter path there.
Yeah, but this is like a cached snapshot of build runner.
Okay.
Let me try clearing this out. This might be a conflict because I had my working version and then I just went to a previous commit, so I'm not sure if there's something wrong here. Let's see. Of course, something will always go wrong when you do it live.
Demo's a 4-letter word.
Let's give this a quick Google. See if anyone's GitHub answer here. Got it. Our tool Flutter gen. Spec. Seems to think this may be. Yeah, yeah. There we go. All right.
Thank you, Stack Overflow.
Yep. Give this a second, make sure this runs. All right, so that succeeded. You'll see that we have two new files that have been created. One is the freezed file, which is going to add some functionality like the copy with methods, and then also the .g file, which is going to be the JSON serialization. I have on my linter to add documentation for all public members. As you can see, that could be a total pain, but normally what I do here, do Command A, Command K, and cursor, and then tell it to write Dart doc comments for all public members. So we can sit here, and as I can explain this, you can watch it just write comments for that beautiful code that I just wrote. Probably better than I would do it myself. So that is one of the handiest things that I've used with cursor so far. So if you have any good AI coding tricks, definitely drop them in the meetup or in the chat to let us know. But this is our first data class. So now we're going to go over to the Gemini message class and implement that one. It did miss a couple of these. We'll just currently processing, just so we can make our Flutter happy. Head over to message, data model, Gemini, message, Gemini, message. All right. We will need those timestamp converters because there is one timestamp that we're going to look for. Let's just drop that down here. Import this. So we will have, let me grab it from here as well. We are going to have one timestamp. And if we reference our data model, is going to be create time. And then we're going to have a string, a required string for the prompt. And then everything else is going to be optional. So we're going to have an optional response. And then we will have that optional status. It's optional because when we create this message, we're only going to fill out the prompt field. Let's make sure that this all works appropriately with the build runner. Awesome. So all is good there. Again, we'll have our handy dandy guy write some Dart.comments for us while we go ahead and we're going to make a Gemini repository. So in this case, we're going to always have these classes take everything that they need as a parameter. The reason you are going to do that is it allows for easier testing. So the only resource that we'll need to implement this repository is going to be an instance of Firestore. So we'll just make this called Firestore. We will add a constructor that takes this instance of Firestore here. Then we're going to have two methods, of course. Autocomplete for you there. First one's going to be send message. We're going to modify this a little bit. We don't need to provide a create time. This is in the right collection, the right prompt here. And then because this is a repository, we wanted to force it to catch all of our errors. So we're going to do a Dart-Z technique here where it will have either a failure or our success, which in this case is just going to be a void response. And then we need to implement this failure class. So we'll just do this in the model folder as well. Let's call it failure.dart, create a class failure, and we'll just have this message. This is a handy thing to do in a larger project. You can have multiple different types of failures. You can have it extend this so you can check specific failures. In this case, we'll just have a generic failure. So we'll import this here, and then we will wrap this in a try catch. And then here we will turn right, null, just to make sure this returns. And then on this we will do return left. We'll put in a nice message here of failed to send message, something like that. All right, so there's our first method for actually sending the message. We're going to utilize something that's really great about Firestore and Flutter, which is we just want to listen for the changes on messages, right? We don't want to have to detect when we send a message, go fetch the messages again. So we're just going to listen for the stream essentially, and then we'll update the UI accordingly. So with that being said, our next method is going to be stream either failure. We're going to rename this to stream messages. And this is not set up how we want it to be. So we're going to clear this out. We're going to do Firestore collection messages. Dot snapshots, which is going to cause that stream. So this will run every single time something changes. And then we're going to do an async map. And we're going to take this, just call it a snapshot here. And we're going to map over these and do our Gemini message from JSON. Snapshot dot, or sorry, one more layer to this. Final messages is equal to snapshot docs map, and then not the prompt, but we will do Gemini message from JSON doc dot, and cast this to a list. This is, that's correct. We need to return messages. We can actually just switch this to a return. And then we still want to appropriately handle our errors and cast them to failures if we need to. So we'll use another method here that's just handle error on error. And we will just have it return our failure. So this actually needs to be a return. And then we need to put this in the success state of the either. And this shouldn't be a list of strings, this should be a list of Gemini messages. String right dynamic. Yeah, and then we want to give this a type on both of these. So now we have our stream messages method and our send message method. So taking these again, we are going to hop back over here. We'll accept our nice comments that it wrote for us while we're writing that other code. We'll go ahead and have it start writing some comments for us here. So now we have essentially our data layer. We have our two methods to interact with Firestore. We have our data classes, but we haven't actually built any UI yet or anything to interact with it. So let's do a couple of things here. Let's head over to pubspec.yaml, make sure we have dash chat pulled in. Doesn't look like we do yet. I'll go ahead and pull in that dependency, dash chat 2. Make sure that gets added. Add back to our repository, see if it's all done. It is. Awesome. So again, we have our pages folder here with our chat feature, and then we have our view with the chat page, which is what we're kind of seeing right here. Very dull, nothing special to it here, but let's go ahead and set up the business logic portion of this. So I'm going to go ahead and create a qubit. I'm just going to name it chat. This will go ahead and create my qubit folder. We're going to have 3 different states. We're going to have an initial state. We'll have a show state. Let's rename this. And we will have a failure state. Or an error state, that's fine. So in the show state, we're going to have a couple things. We're going to have a required chat user. That's going to be the current user. And then we're going to have a required list of chat messages. So these data types are coming from that dash chat package. So in our qubit, we're going to convert our Gemini message to this data model so that way it can just display it really nice for us. So in the error, we also want to have that failure. So we'll require a failure here, and this will just allow us to print that text nicely. Awesome. So this also relies on build runner, so let's go ahead and run that, make sure there's no issues there. Awesome. Ran with no issues. We'll go ahead and have our comment writing begin. If we head over to the qubit, again, it's going to initialize with an initial state. So we're going to need to trigger a method when this starts. We can just say start streaming the chat. Make it nice and simple. we're going to need to access our repository in here, so we will request that. We'll add this as a parameter. And then because we're going to be actively listening for changes, we do need to set up a optional stream subscription. And what this essentially will allow us to do is stream subscription, stream messages, listen, autocomplete like this. So this is pretty close. It's trying to map over our chat messages or our Gemini messages to chat messages. This will be a little bit more advanced. We'll dig in why in just a second. But in this case, we will just, can't get rid of that overflow. Let's see. Just to try and get this to go through for us, we'll just omit an empty list for right now. And then the chat user we will set up for right now. So we'll have a final chat user. We'll just call it current user. I'm just hard coding this for now. So our ID can be Flutter Atlanta. First name can be Flutter, last name Atlanta. And then we will also go ahead and set up another chat user for Gemini. This will just be useful for when we're about to build out these chat messages. We can just reference these variables. So we'll just have their ID as Gemini, first name Gemini, last name Chat. Awesome. So now when we emit our current user, we want to make sure we just pass this current user. So now we have emitting an error state upon a failure. We have emitting a show state, but we still need to map over these messages. But we aren't disposing of this stream subscription yet, so we need to make sure that we do this so that we don't leave any subscriptions open. So we'll override this close method here, and we will access our stream subscription and make sure that that gets canceled. So now I'm going to make a method that's just, map Gemini messages to chat messages. Pass that in there. We will have this just take our list of Gemini messages that we're getting from our repository, and really each Gemini message is going to represent 2 chat messages because you have the prompt that we sent and then the response coming back. So we want to separate those into 2 chat messages. So we know that a prompt is always going to be there. So I'm just going to set up a list of chat messages, and then I'm first going to go and loop over these, so each message and message. I'm going to add a new chat message. We don't need to give it an ID. The first one will be this message.prompt. The user is going to be us, and the created at will be the create time, current date, or now, if for whatever reason that's null. And then if the response does not equal null, we're going to add another chat message. And this is going to take the response that we just checked to make sure isn't null. It's going to be the Gemini user that sent this message. And then the created at is going to be not the create time, but we're going to access the status, and we're going to do the complete time if that's available. If it's not available, we're going to access the status's update time, and if that's still not available for whatever reason, we'll do the datetime.now. So just a kind of a double fallback here. Next thing is we need to sort these in the correct order so that way they look like they're coming in right. So before we return this here, we're just going to do a return chat messages. We'll do the double dot operator, so we want to do it in place, and then we can call a sort. And then instead of A compared to B, we're going to do B compared to A, which is going to make it reversed, so that way the most current message is at the bottom of the list. All right, let's make sure we have everything here. It wants a type here, so we can copy our stream type. Import .z. Okay, so now we have our qubits set up. Let's let's get it writing our nice handy dandy Dart comments there. I think we had some over here. Yeah. Awesome. So we've set up the data layer, we've set up the business logic. None of it's actually being used in the page yet. So let's go ahead and get to that point. So first off, I like to inject the repositories throughout the whole app so that any qubits that need them can access them. So when I do that, I am going to essentially make our app class take all the repositories it needs as parameters. So we're going to have a Gemini repository. It's not going to instantiate this here, but we're going to have this as a parameter. And we will require this here. And then we will wrap this with a block, or not a block provider, a repository provider, which will provide this throughout the entire tree. And we're going to give it that value that is passed. So Gemini repository. Go ahead and import this. And so now this will be available in all of the pages throughout the app. Again, we only have one right now. But why do I require the repository in the app? Well, the reason is normally you're not just going to have one flavor. These days, if you're going to set up a project, you might have a development flavor and a staging flavor and a production flavor. The reason is, if you're a developer, you might be working against a locally hosted server or a staging server. So generally, all of your data source setups are going to happen in the main file, and then you'll set up the repositories by passing them the data sources and then injecting them in. So that's why it's kind of set up like that. So we will go ahead and do that setup here. I actually need to move this up. So widgets, Flutter binding, we'll just ensure everything's initialized there. We will paste our Firebase setup. Make this async, make sure we have our import correct. And then we need to set up Firestore data source. And in that case, we're just going to have like final Firestore is equal to the current instance. So again, Firebase makes it look super simple. It makes it look like we shouldn't be taking the time to do this. But if you had an API provider of some, or an API data source that might have different URLs that you need to point to, this is where you would construct all of this in this almost flavor file. So then we will pass a Gemini repository in here and give it the data source that it needs. Give it the const constructor. Awesome. So now our app has access to the Gemini repository. We still haven't done anything to the page. We've left this all the way for last. So now let's get in and actually make this page look nice. So first things first, let's just add an app bar. We'll just call it Gemini chatbot. Get rid of this const constructor. And then for the body, this is where we're going to add in our dash chat. So it's just a widget, and then we're going to pass it this current user, on-send message, and then the messages. But first, we still haven't accessed our qubit here. So first thing we're going to do is around this page, we're going to provide it using a block provider. And we're going to give it a chat qubit. We'll import Flutter block here. And then we're also going to go ahead and start the chat streaming. This, again, takes the Gemini repository as an argument, and we can just call context.read here to ensure that it reads the Gemini repository that's been injected down in the tree based on the flavor. Next, the dash chat actually needs to be wrapped in a block builder. So we'll go ahead and set up this block builder. This is going to go off of the chat qubit and the chat state. We'll actually get rid of this for just a second. We'll type return state dot when, and then it's going to pre-populate all of the states that we set up, and these can just be methods. So initial, we're just going to center a circular progress indicator, just a little loading state. For show, this is where we're going to have a current user and messages. and we will get to this in just a second. Or actually, we might be able to just auto-complete this here. We will have to implement this in just a second, the onSend. And then the onError, for this case, again, we have our failure coming in as a parameter. And we can just do center, just give it a text, and whatever error message is. Awesome. So this theoretically, well, let's see if I might have to restart the app that's been running in the background. Let's see if it'll reload for us. Yep. So again, at the beginning of this, we went ahead and asked in Firestore directly, why is Flutter the best? And then it came out with this response here. So as you can see, we have this dash chat UI now. We have that message that we set up, and the response all spit out very nice and organized. We still haven't implemented the onMessage yet, though, so let's do that really quick. So again, all the business logic needs to go in the qubit, so we're going to go and add a method here. We'll just call it void send message. It's going to take a chat message. We don't need to create a whole Gemini message class off of this. We can just call send message and then pass it the text. And if you wanted to do the failure state thing here as well, you could. I'm not going to do it for this case, just trying to get this set up. And then we can go ahead and access this via a tear off method here. So this keeps it all super clean, so you don't have any business logic going in the UI here. So now, if we look at this, we're creating this new message, but we're not having to reload chat messages or anything, because again, we're just listening to the stream. So it'll all update in real time. Let's give it a hot restart and give it a try. I thought this one was really funny. I asked it this earlier because it got it wrong. You ask it, what is today's date?
I saw that too.
And then it doesn't work. So as you can see, it'll automatically add it to the chat list live. I don't have any loading indicator waiting for the response, but it will then pop up the response real time without you having to refresh or anything. And it thinks today is February 26th, 2023. So Google is still better than AI for a lot of things. So just be careful what you ask AI for.
No, you just invoke the time travel method.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I know that was a lot. This is a basic, again, integration for setting up and interacting with Gemini. The setup with Gemini with the Firebase extension takes minutes, and then most of what you saw today is making sure you separate interacting with everything into the various data layers, domain layers, and making sure your business logic is separated appropriately. Does anybody have any questions related to what we built today, or any Gemini questions?
Oh, just like drawing it out.
How long would it take to build in like a loading indicator?
So Dash Chat has a nice setup for, let me see what it's called. They call it. It's like a typing indicator. Yeah, so you can have a list of typing users. So you could theoretically say that the Gemini user was typing if any of these were processing. So we could do it fairly quickly.
Never once did your hands leave your arms. It's an impressive demo.
Awesome.
Very good.
What was Randall mentioned Dart Z versus FP Dart? What are those two things?
FP Dart's just another alternative for, so the Dart Z and FP Dart both are showcasing functional programming concepts. So that's that concept that your method could return either a failure or a success state. That's primarily why we use it just for this use case here. It forces you essentially, when you build this into your repositories, it forces you in the qubit to take that into account. So as you can see, if we were, we start this stream, we have to take into account this failure state, and it makes us emit that failure state there if something were to go wrong. So with just normal try-catch setups, if you just did everything with try-catch like here, you could try-catch and not do anything, or somebody could forget to write the try-catch. Something that Dart does not do is tell you when an error could be thrown by a method. some other really popular languages are very good at doing that and will force you to handle the errors. Dart does not do that.
Can you ask Gemini based on the current statistics available to it on the knowledge cutoff day to make a prediction of who will win Super Bowl 58?
Yes.
It's technically a Super Bowl
And
already
if
happened.
Travis Kelce will propose to Taylor Swift?
He's not. I hope he does not.
See what it says. It's probably going to be like, I will not assist you in your sports betting.
Yeah.
He just doesn't answer.
I was reading, I was setting up a project that uses Gemini at work. And so I had to read through all of this stupid, you won't use it for managing a nuclear reactor. I'm like, do we really need to say that? Apparently we do.
So it did not pick up on the 49ers. It thinks it's playing.
Last year. So something's going on with the time-space continuum within Gemini. Like, I only know up to last April. And said, oh, I don't know what happened since then.
Yeah, there's a lot of benchmarks where it does beat GPT-4. A lot of people that use GPT-4 all day, every day, say that it's gotten worse as time's gone on. So you really try them for yourself. There's probably some things that Gemini will do better. There's probably some things that ChatGPT will do better. But the best use cases I've seen so far for these AI APIs is you can really use them to fill holes. Like you can tell it to always respond in a certain data structure and then answer very hard questions that APIs don't really exist for now. And it will respond in a nice data structure that you can always parse to one of our normal models and then use that in your Flutter app. So,
Can you like integrate, is there any benefit, can you potentially integrate it with any of the other like Google ecosystem things to like, I don't know, provision cloud servers or like automate things in your infrastructure?
I'm sure you could. We used a lot of the nice like dev experience features today with, instead of calling like a REST API, we created a Firestore document that triggered this instead. That's the whole Google ecosystem side of this because Google backs Firebase. So by being able to trigger something like this based on just a database record creation and also setting it up in a couple of clicks, that's really the big win here. And I'm sure we'll win a lot of Gemini users because my alternative, if I wanted to set up OpenAI for this project, I'm going to spin up a Firebase cloud function that I'm going to write myself that I have to trigger. I got to write it to trigger the same way, but I'm going to have to write that whole function myself.
Randall mentioned something about Duet AI. Have you heard of that?
Duet AI helps you build out your infrastructure.
Randall knows all the cool gadgets and tools.
I'd be very careful about using, there's a new programming language out there that you can use to, based on what you write, will set up AWS for you. And basically anything like that that's managing your server setup, you're just asking to get exploited for thousands of dollars. Like it messes up slightly and thousands of dollars in bills for sure. So.
I didn't mean to message a K8 at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
Are there any, from the business side, are there any sort of like safeguards or anything they put in their user agreements or like warranties of, you know, hey, if you can prove that this screwed up or something?
User error.
Nice. Got him.
Although I have definitely, when I was a kid, built one of my first apps. It was a multiplayer game, and it was built with Java back in the day. It was a multiplayer app. I got over 100,000 downloads in the first month because that's just how the App Store was then. And I had never built a multiplayer game before. I was in high school. No idea what it was doing, so it barely worked. but I didn't read the AWS free tier all the way through. So I was like, free tier, 1 month free. Let me just pick the top server to run my game on since it's going crazy and it's struggling anyway. Got to the end of that month, and my dad wasn't home at the time, and I got an invoice from Amazon for $3,500. I called Dad. I was like, "You got to come home right now. I really messed up." He came home. He was like, "Oh my gosh!" He called Amazon, and he was like, "Hey, listen, my son. He didn't know what he was doing. He just built a game. They forgave the whole thing."
Wow.
So don't go do that. But if you really messed up, they're not like chopping block. So makes for a great story. Awesome. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, again, Danielle was supposed to be this month, but we have moved her now to next month in March. So she should be talking about the Flutter Casual Games Toolkit. If for whatever reason that gets rescheduled again, we will let you guys know. But hopefully not me next time. You'll get a new speaker. So thank you guys, everybody tuning in online. Really appreciate it. We will see you next time.